Okay, recommendations. The open recommendation we have is 336 waste management milestones. We do have a response from that, and they've more or less accepted everything except the one on mercury. And essentially we said find another way to deal with, to get rid of mercury, and the problem is the mercury's already in the tanks, and the canyon has to use small amounts of mercury for the processing they do, so there's really nothing else that can happen with the mercury, so it's the only part.
There was something that came through this week from the cab about mercury. Does anybody read that?
In it, but it just said that, well, the recommendation said find another way to deal without using mercury, and they said that they can't do that part. Am I saying that right?
That wasn't the one where they're using the shells, was it?
I'm trying to find it.
Shells?
No. And I'm sorry, what was the open recommendation?
336.
Oh, it's been a while.
It's from 2016 if you're
Right.
looking it up.
It took me a little bit to look for it. But the response came in 17.
Oh, it was about the tritium gold traps. I'm sorry.
Oh,
I thought that was, I thought there was something in there about mercury. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was 336 waste management milestones.
Now, can I move that we have to move to close it, or does somebody else have to move to close it?
You can move to close it. We can get a
Okay,
second.
I'm going to move to, if there's no further discussion on this, I'd like to move to close this, or to send it up to the full board to close. Second?
I'll second it.
I do it.
Okay, so everybody that agrees with closing it, raise your hand.
Yeah, aye. We can't do this project.
I don't want to say because it'll be on the recording. Opposed? Abstains? Okay, we'll bring that up at the full board meeting next month. Okay, we have 3 pending, which means we're waiting for DOE to reply to them. From what I understand, the replies are well along the way, but with the change of management and things going on, there's been a little delay, but we'll get those pretty soon.
Yes.
I'm getting a yes from DOE. Okay. Is there any discussion on any of those still pending ones that anybody wants to bring up? No? Okay. I have 2 new concepts that will be passed around to be talked about next time. If I can read them on my little, because I don't have the big one now. Okay, there's 2 of them. One of them is relates to true shipments, transuranic waste shipments to WIP. What I've jotted down here in the background is when WIP had to shut down to total de-inventory of legacy TRU. Okay. A portion of this legacy TRU still remains at SRS, as well as any newly generated TRU. Correct? Okay. However, a much larger inventory of TRU is being generated in the blend down of non-moxable plutonium. As we understand it now, very few shipments are planned to WIP from SRS. Okay.
Of the true?
True. Yeah, everything that goes to WIP is true.
No, I'm talking.
Oh, of the plutonium.
No, that was your statement that, I'm sorry,
I'm sorry.
just a clarification
Uh-huh.
what's not going to WIP? The true shipments?
TRU shipments.
Right, now, and that's being displaced by the downblend? Is that what you're saying?
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is we only have a few shipments, and even though we only had a little bit of legacy and a little bit of newly generated, we're going to have a lot of PU. So if we only have a few shipments, then this is going to start building up here, the downblended PU. That's kind of what I'm getting at.
Okay.
And, you know, they can be a lot more rewriting on this. This is literally, I just did a brain dump this afternoon. Okay, so where was I? As we understand it now, very few shipments are planned to WIP from SRS. Without the PU blend down, this would not be an issue. But the PU blend down will generate a large number of shipments that are not planned to be shipped in the near future, which means this inventory will grow at SRS. I'm still getting affirmatives from DOE. That's all I've written down. And I just said the recommendation is CAB recommends that DOE-SR work with WIP to accelerate shipments from SRS to WIP. Now that can be quite a bit more beefing up of that, but that's the concept. Just do something to keep us from building up a big inventory of, because you're going to be this much PU in each one of those drums, and there's this much PU to put into those drums. So that was one concept. I don't know, does anybody want to discuss that before we move on to my other concept?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Who are you?
I'm Dan Kaminski, CAB. Thanks, Dawn. Okay, so my concerns on that was the physical amount of room at WIP, and that the downblending would, even with accelerated shipments, eventually overtake the facility and it would be filled.
And I'm not 100% sure, but WIP is a big salt mine.
I realize it's a big salt mine, but if I'm not mistaken, I think we've been presented that it would take a whole nother wing
Or
of that salt
drift,
mine
what
to
they
be
call those,
excavated for the downblend of pure plutonium.
and I think that's
anyone-
true. That's probably a true
reasonably
statement. So I don't know
accurate?
what's been done with WIP. You've worked with maybe I needed to put
So
some
I
of that
think
in there.
part to enhance what the recommendation that, since we're talking about your recommendation, is that, my part of it I would want to make sure that they're still well on top of the normal true waste that we've been producing
up
and
legacy,
the legacy
yep,
stuff. So we should stay on top of that, and then somehow, I don't know what the recommendation would read for the management of the downblend, because obviously you're right, it's going to end up sitting at the site in a downblended state for probably decades.
Hopefully not decades, but it could take a while.
Hey, Jim Folk, DOE. Just an observation for you. First, on your comment about the legacy, we have about 125 shipments of
That
legacy
many? I
material
didn't
to
realize
go.
there was still that
Yeah,
much.
so
Okay.
it's about 1,000 containers or so, but it equates to about 120 to 125, half of which is remote handled. So we
Oh.
can only put a few drums on a shipment for that. That's why it's a smaller number of containers. Looks like more shipments.
Okay.
So that's comment number one. Comment number two I would offer up is that, just for your consideration, the downblend program is run through Mike's shop on Nuke Materials.
I know, but
So,
it ends
yeah,
up
you're
in
gonna have a
tier and
crossover
shipping.
here.
Yeah.
I appreciate your focus of let's get the job done on the legacy material. Matter of fact, that was one of our 45-day review items to try to help accelerate and finish that program. But then the Nuke Material side, the blend down side, will be over in Michelanis' shop. So again, for consideration on how you handle that recommendation.
Right, yeah, and I haven't talked to Larry about that at all, but it's going to end up being Waste Management's responsibility to ship it.
Not necessarily.
No?
They-
Oh, so
they-
that's different.
It only becomes, well, it becomes ours if they ship through E area. They may be shipping direct from K area, which is one of the things they're looking at. And then the only oversight we would have is simply the programmatic, making sure the I's are dotted, T's are crossed kind of thing, but they would have full responsibility for certification and shipping at that point straight out of K area.
So would K area shipments be in contention with the rest of the E area shipments? Or would there still be a site plan for shipping stuff off to WIP?
Well, it's not a site plan, it's a complex plan.
You know what I'm saying?
No, but it is an important distinction because, again, it's up to Carlsbad to decide how they want to mix and match the waste as it goes into WIP. So we may have a certain type of waste that they want to store at that point in time. They have different kinds of their WAC.
I know they have to put certain waste in at different
Exactly.
times to be able to mix
That's my
yeah.
point. So, it's not necessarily a site-specific thing. It might be they want some of Idaho type material to match up with K area material or something like that. So again, we don't have complete control of that. We do what I think you're getting at is they do at the start of the year try to identify the number of shipments that will come from each of the different locations.
That's the one thing, because we have, 6 shipments we're allowed this year?
Well, our target was 10 for this year.
And
so
we have
haven't-
100 legacy left to go?
We have about 125 total.
125, I made 125 legacy.
12 years.
Yeah, plus whatever PU we're doing, plus how much newly generated do we make these days?
There's a very small amount. It's tens of cubic meters per year, so it's a small amount.
Shipment wise, a
Um,
shipment, two shipments.
A few, yeah, I'd say a few. It's not much at all.
But it could be, if it's as many as 6, that's a whole year's worth of shipping. Under today's.
Well, again, it's not, the thing you have
Yeah.
to be careful about is WIP has a number of shipments they can take per week, which I think last I saw was up to 8 or something like that. So again, the capacity is out there. It's going to be the prioritization that you're really after.
Okay.
Don, you want to hit some of these other comments? And
Yep. Okay. Go ahead.
Susan Corbett, Cab. So this plutonium, this was this the stuff that was brought to us from Rocky Flats?
It is, again, that's Mike's program, so it's...
I'm
it's
just
not
curious
on
because
Rocky
so
Flats. It could
basically
be-
it was
could
dumped
be-
on us, and now we want to dump it on
but
somebody else.
I
It's
believe
kind of
it
like
was
the hot
more-
potato,
yeah,
right?
I
Okay.
believe it was more than just Rocky Flats.
I think
There
a
were
lot of it was
variety
brought because that
sites.
was one of the reasons. Right. Okay. And there's also some from Los Alamos, I think, or maybe it was Pantex. I can't remember. But basically, it was brought here and dumped on us, and we're trying to deal with it. And now, part of our problem is to dump it on somebody else. So, I have a conscience about environmental justice, and I have friends in New Mexico, and I know that they don't want any more waste dumped on them either. Now, I guess you're aware of this giant sinkhole that has opened up around Carlsbad. Have you heard about this? There's a big, there's actually several stories going on right now about the destabilization of the subsurface in New Mexico and Texas from all the fracking and drilling. If you Google it, you will see a number of stories, and there is growing concern about the sinkhole that is opened up near Carlsbad. So before we start thinking about dumping our waste on somebody else, we need to look closely at what's going on in those areas geologically, along with the fact that the people there don't want it either. So that's one of the reasons. You know, I mean, I understand. I don't know. There's no answer. We certainly don't want to bring any more here. That's for sure. We've already allowed ourselves to have this stuff put in our backyard, and maybe we do have to sit on it for a while. I don't know. But I just think we have to be careful and look at what's going on in New Mexico and consider how those people feel about having that brought and dumped there in their backyard, because that's 24,000 years worth of plutonium, right? Right?
I won't be here.
You won't be here. I know you won't be here. But
Narinder, Malik, Cab. Soni, the material coming from K area to WIP, I have a twofold question. Will it meet the WAC of WIP, and would it require repacking in different containers compared to what we have been sending from E area?
Again, I'm going to defer those questions to New Materials. Maybe we can take an action to get you the rest of the answers there. Okay.
Well, by definition, it's going to meet the WAC. Gotcha.
keep in mind too, we're not really trying to debate all the ins and outs of everything tonight. We're
Right.
getting familiar with it.
But,
June,
yeah.
that's when we're really going to hit this and have to bring everybody in the room.
Yeah, and
Oh, by the way, Narinder Malik again, I use the term WAC. WAC stands for Waste Acceptance Criteria.
okay, it looks like I've got a little bit more work to do, and I'll try to get it to James a little bit sooner than 2 hours before the meeting this time. Yeah?
Susan Corbett, I thought that I had heard that New Mexico would have to pass a new law to expand WIP. Is that, have you looked? Is that true? They have to do something. They have to go to their legislature to get permission to expand beyond what they are now. Is that true? I believe I've heard that or read that.
But that'll be something that we would have to.
You need to investigate that.
Yeah, that would be one of the parts of work with WIP on what to do. So because WIP can't say, oh yeah, go ahead and take it, and they don't have under the law they can't take it. So that all that would be dealt with. But this is just a very basic statement. Okay, yeah, I got a little bit more work to do on this one, and hope they'll get it out. And it's been so long since I've done one of these. The process is I get you put it into the format, you get it out to the committee for review, and send it to these guys for review, and
That's right.
and then we discuss it and
And they'll
massage
just-
it and do all that stuff to it in June for the next full board meeting.
Right, and just for the benefit of the folks who are newer on the cab, just want to make sure that you know that when DOE is doing the review, they're not placing any kind of judgment values on the recommendations. They're just looking for technical and accuracies and making sure that what's stated in the recommendation is true.
Yes. Okay. So I have another one. One of the recommendations that's still pending is to reclassify high-level waste and to classify and to more like classify waste by its physical characteristics and not by its origins. Okay, because by its risk. Mm-hmm. And so along with that, and however that ends up happening, that's not something that happens overnight. That's a long, drawn-out process to do those redefinitions and to change the law and put in the procedures for how to do all this. So it's going to take a long time to do that. But if that does get implemented, and then there are a lot of glass logs out there that are very low activity, relatively speaking. Low risk, relatively speaking. If that happens, then would these canisters qualify for other disposal options, like WIP or other disposal options? So, and my phone keeps going, I'm running out of power. So what I wrote, and again, this is just off the top. When DWF first started up, a significant amount of relatively low activity waste was contained in these logs. The waste in the logs is defined as high level waste, in quotes, because of its origin and not its physical characteristics. The CAB has recently recommended that DOE look into redefining radioactive waste categories by the actual content of the waste versus the origin of the waste. And I could put the risk. I didn't put the risk in there, so I got that one. The CAB realizes that there is a law defining this and that it can't be changed quickly. But as part of the actions ongoing with that recommendation, other actions that will help to de-inventory the SRS of radioactive waste can be done concurrently. The CAB recommends that, and I actually have 4 of them written down here. 1, DOE determine how many of the currently stored glass logs could be reclassified as low-level waste because of the actual curie and actinide content. 2, determine how many future glass logs might be so classified. And I probably should. I'm putting low-level waste here, and then I start talking about WIP. So my brain hasn't gotten. Yeah. Is there any possibility that any of these could be low-level waste? And if so?
I don't think so.
All right, so I probably should take the low-level waste out and just put true waste in. All right, I can do that. All right, so assume I said true waste. Classified as true waste because of the actual curie content and actinide content and something about risk. Determine how many glass logs might be so reclassified. 3, work with WIP to determine what would need to be done to their facility to be able to receive and dispose of those logs. And that would also go along with the changing the laws and all that kind of stuff. So more massaging needed here. And 4, provide a plan for implementing this at SRS, including what new facilities would be required. Because right now there's nothing to package anything, so so that's kind of what I'm talking about there.
Are you talking about storage or repackaging to go to WIP?
Repackaging to ship.
Okay.
Yeah. No, storage is fine. Storage I'm not worried about it. This is all about getting it off-site. And 5, and when I say this plan and schedule, I'm talking high-level pie-in-the-sky stuff. I'm not saying, go through project management and tell me it's going to happen next year, So provide a schedule as to when this could be implemented, assuming technical considerations only, obviously, because politics and funding is always that stretches it out by tenfold. We know that. So that's my concept. Discussion? Yes.
If it's not risky, why don't we just keep it here?
Good question. That's a good question. We could just put it buried in the area, or leave it where it is. That's a good question.
I could address that.
Okay.
Bill Lawless, a citizen in Augusta. The only study I know of that was an EIS done some years ago when the glass waste storage buildings were first opened up. And Lee Poe did the analysis and looked at it for a 10,000 year period. And there were, what you do is you treat the glass waste storage buildings as if they're on the surface repositories and what happens over 10,000 years. And I don't recall the exact words, but we could certainly get a copy of the EIS. But the analysis was when do the buildings degrade and break apart? When does the cement holding the canisters break down, and then finally, when would the canisters themselves corrode? And I think I don't know that the canisters ever break apart, but I think Lee estimated, he was working for DuPont at the time. I think he estimated that there would be 3,000 to 4,000 fatalities over a 10,000 year period. But this has been many years, 20 years since I read his work. So.
So, can I ask a question? So if you bury it in the ground, you basically have, it's out of sight, out of mind. If you keep it on the surface, you can always repackage it and rebuild a building around it so that you can monitor it, make sure that it's not leaking. If you stick it under the ground, you have no idea what's going on. If a giant sinkhole or if Yellowstone and the magma chambers open up, you have no idea. If you keep it on the surface, you can monitor it for 3,000 years, and we can monitor the pyramids. So I can make an argument for keeping it, and just keeping it have a way to repackage it if necessary, and reconstruct a building around it, and monitor it that way.
John?
Yes.
Narinder, Malik, I think we have to remember through the DOE orders, the requirement is that water will not seep more than 10 to power minus 7 inches per year. So that will not come in contact with moisture and...
In the area you're talking about?
No, in the repository.
In the repository.
Yeah. So it will be much safer.
I think she's referring to burying it in the ground here versus leaving it in the glass waste storage building here. Is that what you're... Burying it in?
Well, let me come back again. I think we have to look into the groundwater level in this area is pretty high, maybe 20, 30 feet, maybe less than that.
6 feet in my farm.
So, then we do not meet the requirement 10 to minus 7 inches per year. So we will be just wasting our time just putting in the ground here.
I wasn't suggesting putting it in the ground. I was suggesting above ground, monitored retrievable storage.
Essentially leaving it where it is.
You can always rebuild a building if it starts to crumble. Just a thought.
Yes. Yes, Dan.
I think then, excuse me, Narinder Malik again. I think then we have to look into many other parameters like radiation. I don't know why I'm talking on behalf of DOE. They should be answering this question. We have to look into the safety and the rad monitoring and air emission discharge from the radiation, and maybe over the period they may crack and leak, and radioactive might come in contact with ground.
Yes, Dan.
So, let's let Dan give his comment. Let's keep in mind, this is going to come back. We're going to have a full-throated debate on this for sure.
But this is giving me more information to how to beef this thing
Yep.
up, though. So.
Sure. And if you feel the need to let Dan
Yeah,
go,
let Dan go
then
ahead.
maybe let Soni give her update, and we can come back around to it when we have time at the end.
Okay.
So two parts of it. The first part was just a question, but the second part was actually something Susan had said that I could actually relate to and support, and that is having the waste actually monitorable. Because once you put it in WIP so deep down, eventually, and I think it's even by design, they're going to cave that salt in on top of itself to stabilize it. You can no longer inspect it. So that has some merit to it. But the question I actually did have was, I think someone in a presentation or open discussion had stated that the U.S. was the only country that classifies its nuclear waste in this manner, or one of the major ones. Okay. And the other major ones.
An intermediary.
So they have a classification based on risk?
That's not based on risk, but they have something in between high level and low level. They have an intermediate level, I believe. That's right. European waste is.
Can we into the microphone so that way he can?
I read that other countries have an intermediate waste level, kind of like our greater than Class C, but they call it something different. So.
And then one other aspect of the whole program is that I know we were looking at we did the double stacking of the canisters for the classified waste, and that's great. But I think even eventually we still run out of room if we don't get that long-term repository, and this has the opportunity done, and that's the other plus factor of it, is to maybe segregate some of that out, actually makes you happy, Susan, because it would keep the high-level waste in those classified canisters in that building, because the repository is not going to happen, in my opinion. But that being said, you get what you want, and we don't have to build another many $million-dollar building in the process.
Yes,
Narinder Malik, I think we have to consider that maybe sometime we might have earthquake in this area, so we have to look at that storing at the site.
But Narinder, we haven't been fracking here. Who are we going to blame that on?
I'll put my sinkhole up against your earthquake.
I remember Gil Allensworth, when they gave us the double stacking presentation, that may have been before Narinder, you were on the cab. They gave us a very in-depth thank you, analysis of earthquake, and I just remember it was on the Richter scale. They took it to like a 1.5. You know, I don't remember, but they took it to a much higher level than South Carolina's ever experienced. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but the earthquake was something they really did put a lot of. I remember it was a couple slides. I mean, and I never even thought about it. So you're way ahead.
Okay, this is Dawn again. Looks like I've got my work cut out for me. So anything else we want to talk about on that? Well, we're a little behind schedule, Soni, sorry. Soni Blanco, come up and give her status.
Good afternoon. I'm Soni Blanco. I work for the Department of Energy, Senior Technical Program Manager. I'm going to give you now the update for liquid waste. The liquid waste system outage, we have major portions of this outage complete. As you might have heard before, Melter 3 was successfully installed in the Defense Waste Processing Facility, and 5 canisters have been filled since the restart on New Year's Day. At this point, safety basis changes for DWPF have been approved, and the implementation is occurring. DWPF resumption of operations is projected for the end of this month, followed by the Modular Caustic Site Solvent Extraction Unit, or MCU, so we can resume operations in for salt processing. As far as the double stacking, actually, we have double stacked so far 222 canisters in FY18 in the glassware storage building number 1 for a total to date of 424 canisters. And we have also modified this year in FY18 155 positions for a total of 650 positions to date. As far as the Saltstone facility, we have processed almost 200,000 gallons so far of decontaminated salt solution in FY18, and we are anticipating resumption of operations by the end of this month also. As far as evaporator repair, the initial 3H evaporator repair was completed, and that you might have heard this already. However, as it was returned to service, pinhole leaks were found in another location of the evaporator pod. After a systems engineering evaluation, SRR will proceed with safe interim operations under enhanced surveillance in parallel with the procurement of materials for a new evaporator pod. The 3H evaporator operations will be resumed once the safety basis for interim operations under enhanced surveillance is developed and approved, in addition of obtaining the okay from the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control, DHEC. As far as the tank closure system removal, or ticker, as we call it, all the ticker unit modules have been shipped from Westinghouse and received at the Savannah River site. Receipt inspection is underway and installation has begun on accepted modules. The work on Tank 10 and safety analysis continues, with the technology demonstration planned to begin late summer or early fall this year. Saltstone Disposal Unit 7 construction. Site preparation continues. You know, we got now the omnibus budget, so we can continue with the work there. SDU 7 is the second of 7 mega volume disposal units planned to hold low activity saltstone grout. Salt waste processing facility. Testing and commissioning is 73% complete as of February of this year. 59 of 60 system operability tests have been completed, along with 3 of 5 integrated system operability tests. Construction of the next generation solvent cold chemical feed facility is on schedule.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions, discussion? Yes, Narinder.
Narinder, Malik. The equipment which was built by Westinghouse and came here, and you said receipt inspections are being conducted. Who is performing those receipt inspections? Are the QA inspectors or the QA engineers and engineers together, or just based on checklist?
Go ahead. We got our ticker owner here.
Yes, Jeff Bentley, Department of Energy. The answer is yes and yes. You've got the QA group for Savannah River remediation has been involved throughout the fabrication, assembly, and testing of the ticker unit out at Westinghouse, and they are also part of the receipt inspection here on site, along with the engineers. I guess would you refer to them as I think you called them the system engineers or something a second ago. They as well are part of that process.
Are they going to write any self-assessment report on that?
Self-assessment. No, this is Jim Folk. I don't anticipate a separate self-assessment report. Obviously, what they would do, if there are any things that are identified in the process from delivery, they would do like a non-conformance report to address the specific issues that they may identify, whether that be a scratch, a mark, or whatever it is that doesn't quite measure up. Then they would look at that and evaluate it. But that part of it would all be documented, yes.
Pardon me, one more simple question. Were there any NCRs on this?
There have been some NCRs.
Have they been closed?
No, they have not all been. I don't know if any have been closed completely yet. I do know that they have been addressing the issues. However,
the reason I'm saying because before you install it, they have to be closed.
Yes. So let's be careful when we say what is being installed. It's the modules that have passed the receipt inspection and have been approved. They do not have NCRs against those modules. This ticker unit, although it's, you want to think of it as just one big thing, it's a modular system with different skids that end up connecting together. So we're able to inspect these modules independently and then install those modules as they become approved. So some have been, some have not. Those that have not are not being installed yet.
Once again, please pardon me, I used the acronym NCRS, non-conformance report.
Yes.
Dan?
Tim Lashes. Dan Kaminski, Cab. Just a quick question on SDU number 7. Since the site prep is now underway, it was presented to the Cab quite a while back, and questions were asked regarding site planning in general, because after SDU 6 was built, we then had to move all the infrastructure, the temporary buildings, obviously the power to those buildings, probably plumbing, the whole 9 yards. And we had asked if there was going to be some advanced view of where they're going to put that next site, so we're not playing this continual shell game of moving buildings and infrastructure. Instead of spending money on that, we'd rather spend it on SDU number 9 or 10 or whatever.
You are absolutely right, and planning is going on to actually address that, where the trailers for the people working in the construction and the different tasks are going to be housed, and that is going to be on a location that can be used by the other SDUs. The site preparation is also being planned so it can actually be used for the next SDUs coming. So timing is everything. We definitely have the intention of try to everything that we do can be used for the next one, and try to plan more in multiple units rather than just one, where you demobilize and then mobilize again for the next one. So definitely we are doing a lot of that planning, and we are definitely hoping that the budgets in the future support that. So it's going to be dependent on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Thank you, Soni. All right. Okay, discussion on the presentation we had in March, the sonar mapping technology. Any questions, comments, discussion? Nope, not at all.
You're welcome, sir.
See, the funny thing is, I had 5 minutes to talk about what I wanted to talk about and all the recommendations, and we took what, 45 minutes, and you give me an hour and 25 minutes for this one.
The whole time is yours to allocate as you wish, Sean.
It's only a guide.
So, discussion on this. Any questions? Did I hear you?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I appreciate you coming back and making a very decent presentation when you gave us in March. I had a couple of questions because maybe I didn't understand properly or there was not enough information. We know from the slide the coverage was 26%. And I think when we look at the last slide, 12, it says we are not going to use it anymore. My question is that when we were doing a long time ago, how accurate they were, those analysis?
All right. So, again, Jeff Bentley with the department. I received your email with your presentation, and let me go through those and try to address them, and then, if necessary, question a bit of confusion mapping methodologies that we implemented 5 years ago. We did some mapping in F-tank farms, so you ask about, how is this different, using sonar different from that map, the times we did those mappings. I just wanted to state that we take maps of the tank bottom at different times and for different reasons. For example, one is for determining the remaining solids that we have in the tank following our bulk waste removal efforts. That's when we try to get as much of the waste out of the tank as we can, but there's still going to be what we call a heel down on the bottom with solids in it. And we just want to know how much is down there. And then another time that we do the mapping is following our is for final tank closure, and that's following the removal of that heel, and we get that's when we try to get the tank as clean as possible prior to grouting. The mapping that you were referring to from 4 to 5 years ago is, I'm not exactly sure on which it was for, but it was probably either related to a mapping effort we did in Tank 7 following bulk waste removal, or possibly the mapping that we did for the tank closures on Tanks 5 and 6 before we went in and grouted. Okay, but we do have to map the tanks, and we do have to map them more than once. Okay, I just wanted to make that part clear. And then following on, you asked how is the sonar different from these previous mappings? So, as you mentioned at the start of this, the methodology for all the previous mapping efforts that we've done has been using a visual camera inspection technique. Sonar is an alternative method to that visual camera inspection. Okay. Instead of going down and taking video and then trying to take, look at the pictures to figure out, and reference points to figure out how much stuff's in the tank, sonar uses basically, so it's like we call it a sound energy pulse that goes down and reflects back up. And it uses, don't want to get into any technical things where I'm not an expert, but like a density location to determine the height of the solids that are remaining in the tank. And then from that, you can get a volume estimation. You can perform a volume estimation based on that height profile. We performed the sonar demonstration to evaluate just how well that methodology would work in comparison to our current methodology of visual camera inspection. Tank 7, and it was chosen specifically since we had done the visual mapping following bulk waste removal, and it was still in that state. We decided that would be a good one if we did this sonar, we could compare the results with what we had found from the previous visual mapping. The benefits and cost savings was another question you brought up regarding sonar. I want to start, before I even get into that, and say that I want to be very careful, because cost, just want to state up front that the cost did not play a part in our evaluation of the technology itself. Okay, but the benefit of sonar was actually the accuracy that it had with its remaining solids estimates for the area that it could cover. You know, so you mentioned that we in our demonstration we got like a 26 to 30%, 26% coverage, but for that 26% tank coverage, it is extremely accurate. Okay. Another benefit is that the data that you get and the maps that you generate, they are very clear and it's very easy to interpret. See the exact locations where you may have a mound that you need to go back and try to clean again. In that respect, it's I would say more accurate than visual. You know, if you can get the coverage area to where you need it to be, it becomes even more beneficial and then becomes something viable. Unfortunately, because the unavailability of riser locations in our tank, it makes deployment non-effective due to the lack of the coverage area. We just can't get enough coverage with the risers that we have. Additionally, there was no cost savings from using sonar, but when I said that was beside the point as far as demonstrating the technology and just how well it works. It's just going forward without the riser availability, it really becomes a non-issue. But the fact that we didn't have a cost savings, but I want to also be careful. We just said we were not going to go forward at this point with using sonar as an alternative. We would remain with the visual camera inspections. That's not to say that we would never go and use sonar. As we mentioned, at this point in time, with the riser, unavailability of the risers, it's just not feasible. We have not stopped from going back and look, is there a way to overcome that? It seems to me that we just have some engineering obstacles, and perhaps it will become possible in the future. Okay, just leave that out there. And then I'll write this one down. You want to know how accurate or how our current visual mapping technique is?
Yeah, I excuse me, this is Narinder. I just wanted to know that when the old engineering staff was doing the mapping, visual mapping, they were looking at the volume, how they were calculating. I have no idea. Okay. Because you talk to the engineers and they can walk you through, they tell you calculation and it goes over my head.
Yeah.
So
I will say you're going to have more potential error in the visual mapping technique because, as you say, you're going to take a video camera to survey the tank bottom, and then from that you're going to use reference points in the tank to determine the height of the solids, and then you will have to make some assumptions on I would think on the densities of the material that are in the tank. Could lead to some more error when you come up with your volume calculation. While I would think that with sonar it would be a much more accurate representation of the bottom of the tank, utilizing reference points, that error should get reduced. So in a comparison method, if you were to compare it that way, I would think the uncertainty it's going to be much lower with sonar. But just how much uncertainty we have in the visual mapping calculation, I have to go follow up and see what's estimated.
Thank you very much. As you have educated us much more. And one more question. Maybe on the East Hill, when the time comes to clean them 6-pack tanks, they don't have too many cooling coils. It may be better there to use it.
I mean that's also a possibility. We chose tank 7. Though we wanted to pick what we thought would be the toughest tank. All right, what has the most obstacles, and it's that type where you have both the horizontal and the vertical cooling coils, in the bottom. Plus, not to mention all those support columns that are in there. It becomes
all tanks 1 to
they
8,
all have
1 to 8 are terrible.
Yeah. So,
Thank you.
okay.
Susan Corbett, Cab. A couple questions. So these risers that you keep, can you tell me what is the riser?
Well, not
It's not in that picture.
not on that picture because you're talking about from the tank top.
Oh, okay.
You're gonna
It's a manhole.
basically a hole that we're gonna go down from the top of the
I was
tank.
thinking like bleachers you sit
So,
on, like the risers in
Yeah.
the gym.
It's what Gil wants to go stick his head into and look
So
at.
I was thinking kind of the riser. Okay. So,
Pardon me.
and then
Right.
over on, I understand. On this page, the page here, you had a comment in the limitations. Says non-homogeneous supernate composition alters velocity of the sonar pulse and affects, quote, time of flight. What does that mean? Time of flight measurement. What is the time of flight?
So I mentioned that there's a sonar pulse that goes through this. It has to travel through a liquid, and if your liquid is not consistent, if it's not homogeneous throughout, if it's like layered with different strata, different densities, it will change the velocity of that pulse as it travels through. And so, you can overcome that if you know what those layers are, because then you can make your adjustments for your calculation.
We don't always know what's in the bottom of these
It
tanks.
just makes it much more challenging when you have that sort of situation.
The purpose of doing this is to be able to go back, and I'm assuming once we know what's down there, we are going to go back in and try to clean as much of this out of here as possible.
Oh yes, this is what you're seeing here is what followed bulk waste removal. It has we have to clean the heel. We have to remove the heel.
So everything would be scoured out of there, or if that's the right word.
Yeah, it would follow similar procedures to what we've done with other tanks that we have already closed and grouted. Could be an enhanced chemical cleaning. Could be some other, just wasn't like an oxalic acid.
So that really all that's left
could be a
is
mechanical cleaning. I don't,
all that's really left is the metal itself is radioactive. The canister, the tanks themselves, the metal has become irradiated, but there's no real supernate or materials in there, correct?
Jim Folk, DOE. Remember what our standard is. We work with DHEC and EPA to define what's the maximum extent practical. So we will work to pump, whether it's acid in some of the tanks earlier, remember that did not have any coils, we use some robotics. Again, you're not going to get every drop out of there. When you said scoured metal, that's why I want to be careful. There will be some residual amount in there. But again, what we do is we remove as much as we can. We then present that through public meetings, through DHEC, through EPA, get their concurrence that we have cleaned it to the maximum extent practical. And again, that is defined as not only technical cleaning, but things that may have other impacts. For instance, dose to workers.
Right.
So if I would have to, somebody talked about the risers sticking their head, okay, if I have to get an employee there who has to do some maneuvering of pumps and other cleaning, he may take a dose as well. So that all factors into that equation. How much can I get out of there practically? And then at that point, we will declare the tank empty and ready to ground.
See, this is the only part. This is the part of this whole thing that bothers me, because when you talk about the water table, I know we're going to grout these, and it would be grouted in concrete of some kind, right? But that's what, maybe 300 years. Eventually, these will sink down over maybe 500,000 years. They will sink down into the water. These tanks are going to sink. They're not going to stay on the surface up there. They will sink down.
Pardon?
No?
If I can be allowed to give a comment on that. These tanks are built on very, very strong foundation. They have been there with million gallons of liquid in it, and it won't sink. And let me again give further up, when the tanks are closed, under CERCLA, the whole tank farm will be closed again. it will be vegetated.
From the top down.
Yes.
But how about from the bottom up?
Well, what we described was the physical cleaning process. Now, don't
Right.
forget, as part of the review, the 3116 requirements, that's Section 3116 out of 2005 National Defense Authorization Act, identified how we can declare these tanks non-high-level waste and ready for closure. So that whole process defined very specifically the role that DHEC plays, the role EPA plays, the role that the NRC plays in setting what would be limits for residual material left behind. So as part of that calculation of are we clean enough, we also have the estimate then, as Jeff described, of quantity. We have an estimate, we sample, we have an estimate of curies left behind. All that goes into the performance assessment, and I don't know when the last time was we described the performance assessment, but that might be something that would be suitable here to make sure, especially some of the new players have an understanding for. But then you go through that process for the tank farms, and we did this for Saltstone as well, where you identify then what is the residual amount you expect left behind, and you measure that up against the NRC regs, the 10 CFR kind of regs for amount of dose you would expect for the lifetime of the facility, actually out through about 1,000 years. So you project that out. And so what we do as part of that sampling process, and the reason we do the whole mapping process is to ensure we've removed sufficient material that will keep us above or keep us below those overall guides and limits that are defined.
So you have a curie count for each tank of what you estimate is still in there in terms of curies?
See, that's where the importance of this all comes together. So, for instance, if by whatever process, the former, the current process of cameras and taking pictures, let's say we come up with 10,000 gallons left behind, right? That we just, physically, we can't get that last 10,000. Then we sample that to get a curies, what is the average amount in there, average that across those 10,000 gallons, and then we have a measure for how many curies are we actually leaving behind. We can then measure that up for, again, through 1,000 years, through however long, what is the projected dose that could occur from that residual amount. But again, that's why it's so important that we do find good, effective ways to measure that residual amount. You're in.
He's going in the tank. We're going to lower him.
2 pair and a hog head.
He'll be using Mantis there.
He doesn't have a clue what I'm saying. Anyway, okay. Any other?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Oh, yes.
Doug Howard, Cab. With the sonar, you're saying that you get more of a depth perception of what's left in the tank versus that visual?
For the given coverage area.
Right.
So the sonar has to be able to see the area for you to be
exactly
effective. So, as we mentioned, we got 26% coverage in tank 7 utilizing 3 risers. That's the risers we had available that we could go in. The others are filled with things like pumps or whatever types of equipment they need to put into the tank. If we could go up to, I believe if we could double that with 3 other riser locations and had 6 available, I think our estimate is that we could actually get somewhere up around a 75 to 79% coverage area, at which time you could have a meaningful volume estimation of what's in your tank. You still have some uncertainty because obviously that's not 100% coverage, but it becomes much, much more, and you're very good with that 75, 79% coverage. You've got a really sound idea of what's there. So it's not straight. When we talk about this and try to talk about in comparison, it's not straight up apples to apples, right? With the 2 methods, they each have limitations and they each have benefits. But if we can the more we could increase the coverage area with the sonar, the more beneficial it would become, the better you would get in comparison, and eventually it would be worthwhile to pursue.
And with all the I guess, the technology that we have in the world today. There's no other means that you could possibly get better, I guess, imaging.
Well,
Are there better imaging sources out there besides those two?
perhaps there might be another technology, but once again, we'd have to take that, analyze it for you doing this mapping, and then go and demonstrate that it could be done. That's all part of the process, and that all takes time. I'd like to just, it's probably a good time to say, as far as sonar goes, it's since the coverage area was the issue, now we can go back and look, can we increase the coverage area by doing using sonar technology? We showed we could deploy it safely, that we get good results for cover, where we got the coverage. Are there ways that we could, engineer implementing this technology in the tank such that we get better coverage area? Let's just. I think if somebody mentioned, hey, we could drop this thing down there with a remote control boat, run around, you could, it seems far fetched, but maybe, possibly, who knows? Perhaps we can work through some of these things and improve that. We have not stopped on sonar as far as going and investigating possible engineering workarounds. That's still in discussions. We still talk with the vendor who came and performed a demonstration to see what we could possibly do. But going off, I don't really want to go off into other technologies because we would be starting, regardless of what was proposed, we'd be starting from scratch. We'd have to go show that it would work, at our site, in our facilities, in our tanks, to do that job. So that would, whatever that is, it would take us a while to do.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Bobby Williams, Cab. When you close the other tanks, what method did you use to determine what was left in the tanks? Did you use robotics or?
Well, the two different questions, I think. When you say that, what method did we use to determine? We used a visual camera process that we identified here. Okay. What I mentioned earlier with the robotics was a tool we use to clean more material out. So again, depending on the application, you may be able to use straight water, you may need a little bit of acid, you may have an opportunity to use robotics to do a physical kind of vacuum cleaner kind of approach, right? So several different ways to remove waste. What we're talking about here specifically is, now what do I have left? What's the best way to do that? So again, we used the visual process, we reviewed sonar to see if it had applicability here. Not quite the tool we need yet. But back to the earlier question, I want to make sure we all understand the visual process works. Okay? So we have the mousetrap. We have the mousetrap that works. We're looking to see, is there a better mousetrap, right? So again, I want to make it clear that as we've gone through the process of identifying what residual waste is left behind, we have a visual process, and it has met all expectations. And again, combined with the review of our regulators, NRC engagement. So it is a process that works. We're just looking to see, and really what drove the sonar discussion to begin with was in our negotiations with DHEC for some of our milestones that we had. Shelley, to her credit, challenged us with what other opportunities are out there. Can you look at seeing if there is a technology that may help parts of the overall closure program? So the department's commitment to DHEC was, yes, we will go look. That's what we did. And, in conversation, won't put words in Shelley's mouth, but again, in conversation with Shelley, she was very appreciative of the fact we took a look and understood that sometimes these things work out and pan out and sometimes they don't. So anyway, that's what we were able to deliver with this exercise.
Another question. Did you check with SRNL and see if they could fabricate something or come up with some kind of method?
SR&L is very integrated into a lot of the liquid waste program. So yes, they've been part of the process. I don't know if they specifically had anybody on this task, but they've been engaged with the liquid waste program throughout. We exercise them a great deal.
Okay. Thank you.
Susan Corbett, Cab. When you determine that a tank is ready to be closed, are you basing that closure on the amount of volume left or the curie count left? Or both? I mean, is it just you done? How
ultimately, volume is kind of your measure for the material coming out, right? So what we do is by whatever means we've used, whether we're rinsing slurry and pulling out that material, that the volume is the obvious indicator. But as I said, then what you do is we go down through the lab. They go down and identify for us a statistical number of samples that we have to take. So they'll define and say 25 or 30 samples, whatever it may be. We have an estimate for volume. Then they'll take those samples, average that out.
So is there a curie count above which you would continue to clean?
If it's possible.
Okay.
That's right.
That's
and so from a performance assessment perspective, we look at the total area, right? So, and make estimates for what closure will be. What we may find is in one tank, we were able to more effectively clean it. And another tank may not be quite so effective because there's something in it that won't dissolve or something.
So every tank will be left with a different kind of amount.
Right. But it's all under that umbrella of the performance assessment that says our expected dose in umpteen years is the following. And that's the umbrella we stay under.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion? Thank you very much. Okay.
This is the best discussion I had.
All right, we are to public comment. Are there any public comments?
Yeah, I first comment was I think that the motion that was passed to dispose of the spent melter was excellent. And I've been talking to the Department of Energy, and I don't know that anything, the contacts that I have, I don't know that anything will happen as the result because of the regulations that are in place. You mentioned the law, changing the law. You might want to change that word to the regulation. The regulation
I was
is
wondering about that.
The regulation is 435.1. But I think you're right on target. You want to follow up with that and try to build a critical mass of support to continue to build on that. There's no way we can leave the vitrified canisters in the glass waste storage building. That's a temporary, those are two temporary buildings. And I'm not sure that we'll ever find the money to be able to build another glass waste storage building. And we will run out of space. She was concerned about leaving the curies in those tanks. Well, we're going to wind up with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of curies in those vitrified high-level waste canisters. There's the danger to future generations. The United States of America is not 230 years old, based on our Constitution. And we have to protect that material for 10,000 years. That hardly seems reasonable that we can plan that for in the future. So I think it behooves us. We'll not be able to convert it to a repository. We'll not be able to make it into a monitored storage facility without going through an EIS and without changing the rules and the regulations. And I just don't think that the public would accept it. I wouldn't accept it myself. I think that that's a cop-out. We've got a perfectly good repository, and that's the WIP facility. It's the only one that's operating as a repository. And I think we need to take advantage of that. There's some things that you can do. First off, when we went when we tried to close the first two tanks, tank 17 and 18, 17 and 20, when we closed those first two tanks, nobody had ever closed a tank before. So they came to the cab and we made the recommendation, and they closed them without any public fuss at all. When they went to close tanks 18 and 19, we got a lawsuit. The Department of Energy lost the lawsuit, and that led to the National Defense Authorization Act of 2005 that Jim was talking about. And the only reason I think we got that support to close 18 and 19 and to continue closing was because we got DHEC to work with us, and Lindsey Graham, the senator from South Carolina, was the one who actually got that law pulled together, and unfortunately we had to have NRC get involved in it. And the NRC actually slowed the process down for a while, but the CAB got involved again and got another motion on the floor and passed, and we got the NRC and the Department of Energy to close tanks 18 and 19, and what one DOE official said was the fastest action he'd ever seen DOE headquarters take. So I think the message there is that this CAB, this committee, can get things done. It's a small tail maybe, but it can wag the entire dog. And you just have to be willing to push for a long time. And I think you can get it done. I recommend that you get somebody from headquarters to come down here and talk about DOE 435.1 and ask them to explain what has to happen. What does DOE headquarters need to do to get that ball rolling? I think you should get a speaker from WIP. WIP really wants the business, and I think we should give it to them. We should go out of our way to give it to them. There's a lot of cost involved, and time is not on our side. It's getting very hard to get things done because of budgets, and we're now having to worry about retirement portfolios for people who work at the Savannah River site. Meanwhile, we've got some really hazardous material sitting on the surface, so we need to get that taken care of. There are long-term costs. We can't continue to monitor this every year. There's a huge amount of cost in keeping an eye on what's going on out there, keeping the rabbits out, keeping the place clean and the fans operating. And finally, you ought to look into the transportation. I've been told by my colleagues in the Department of Energy that we have the True Pack that can handle this. I don't know if it's the True Pack 3 for the large bulk.
For the canisters?
Yeah. Or would it be the True Pack 2?
No, I'm sorry, Jim Folk. It's a 72B, what they call a 72B container that we currently use for remote-handled true material.
But I think it would be nice to have a presentation on that, make that part of your recommendation. Again, I wouldn't put all of this in one recommendation. You want to keep this thing alive for a while, and so you need to get the state of South Carolina intimately involved. If they don't get upset about the filling up of the glass waste storage building, if the possibility that the glass waste business may have to stop because there's no room to put this stuff, then and that should be the tool that you need to get DHEC involved. Get them involved, get them to push, to work with us, work with the citizens and work with the site, and I think that we can get this thing done.
Jim, question, does the 72B container, can that hold a glass waste canister?
The belief is it can. Obviously, it's not. It hasn't been qualified or certified for that container.
But physically, it could hold.
size-wise, I am told it could hold a container, yes.
Needs to be certified. That's a key word.
Yeah, it's got to be tested.
So you want to get a recommendation. There's another recommendation. Make sure that this facility, the transport, gets certified, and that's a couple of year process right there. If nothing else, if WIP would take it tomorrow, it would take at least 2 to 3 years.
Yep, get that part done.
So, and then you got to get WIP involved. We not only want to know that they want to take it, but we want to hear from the WIP people about how these canisters will operate, how they will perform inside of WIP, down underneath. WIP's got thousands and thousands of acres, hundreds of thousands of acres. There's plenty of room out there, and we can't afford to leave this waste, this very dangerous waste on the surface for our children and grandchildren to deal with. We should take care of it because we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Any other public? Okay, any other discussion? All right. Anything else we need to do? That's gavel says it's adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.